latest announcement of the agreement for some of the banks to pay several $billions now to supposedly to homeowners who were cheated in one way or another in the foreclosure crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just to me, the most significant aspect of this is that it speaks to the failure of the government to address the foreclosure problem still 4 and 5 years after the financial crisis. And one of the points I make in the piece I just wrote, Secrets and Lies of the Bailout, is that foreclosure relief was originally written into the statute, the TARP statute, as a primary function of the original bailouts. It's right there in black and white, Section 109, that TARP was supposed to provide a massive program of foreclosure relief, and they never got around to it. And the only bailout program that ever provided any foreclosure relief was HAMP, and that to date they've only ended up spending about $3 or $4 billion out of all the bailout on that program. They have now, through litigation, there are these settlements that are starting to trickle in, but it's just too little too late. And you contrast that with what happened at the beginning of the bailout, where the banks and the financial companies were instantly handed hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars of relief. And I think that dichotomy is important for people to recognize, that the relief for ordinary people is still coming slowly and insufficiently years later, whereas relief for Wall Street came instantaneously and was excessive.
The latest news about AIG, the board has decided not to sue the American people for not bailing them out enough, not joining the former CEO,
I think they probably didn't want to become a Saturday Night Live routine this weekend, but yeah.
Can you talk about the significance of this and what actually is going on? Greenberg, the CEO, the former CEO, is suing.
Right, yes. This is a long-standing dispute between the former CEO of AIG, Hank Greenberg, and the government. And it's funny, if you actually read Greenberg's suit, there are some points in it that have a little bit of validity. I mean, it's still preposterous that Greenberg, who was in a way kind of like the patient zero of the financial crisis, because the scandal that he started at AIG back in 2000, in the early 2000s, it was a reinsurance scandal where he was artificially inflating the balance sheet of AIG. That led to a downgrade of AIG, which led to the catastrophe of 2008 when the company went into imploded, and that subsequently caused the entire financial crisis. You can really point to Hank Greenberg as maybe the guy who caused the financial crisis, and here he is suing the American government over the bailout. But one of the things he says in his lawsuit is that the bailout of AIG was not really a bailout of AIG. It was a bailout of the companies that were owed money by AIG because they gave 100 cents in the dollar to all the counterparties of AIG, like Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank and Barclays, and that if he were in that position, he would have negotiated a much tougher deal. That's probably true. I mean, there's actually some validity to that point, that there's no way under any rational circumstances that those companies should have gotten 100 cents in the dollar for the money they were owed by AIG.
William Black, I'd like to ask you about this whole issue of the mortgage settlement that was announced. It is really, to me, amazingly scandalous that years later, justice has not been forthcoming for all of these homeowners who lost their homes. I think the settlement calls for about $3.5 billion in cash to some 3 million homeowners. That works out to maybe about $1,000 a homeowner. Here we had instances of banks with the massive robo-signings, evicting people from homes that they didn't even legally own at the time. The thing became such a mess that the government review ended up wasting about $1 billion just on the consultants hired to review all the bank foreclosures. What do you make of this settlement?
So the first thing is, this is more of what Matt and people like me have been writing about for years, the complete immunity of the elite Wall Street folks who caused this crisis through fraud, who became wealthy because of those frauds, and were then bailed out as a result of their frauds. None of them are being prosecuted. So we have admissions, and by the way, this would have continued but for the discovery of this fraud. In other words, the banks weren't stopping it on their own. The robo-signing, that means what they were doing was lying systematically to the tune typically of the large places of 10,000 times a month, so over 100,000 times a year, committing felonies that would lead to people being made homeless in America in many cases. It's just an astonishing aspect that nobody has gone to prison for all of this, and that they gave them one of the largest grants of immunity you'll ever see. Second thing, as you say, the money in the press reports is grossly inflated. There's only about $3 billion in cash. You're quite correct. That works out to less than $1,000 per victim. So it is exactly what Borofsky quotes Geithner as saying, that these housing programs were not designed for the victims. They were designed to, quote, foam the runways for the banks to reduce their loss exposure. So the rest of the supposed $5 billion in settlement is really just what in the commercial world we call troubled debt restructurings, which are the things you would do anyway if the government didn't exist, because in most cases it's better for the bank not to have the default, to instead reduce the principal slightly. So none of that is actually a bailout. None of it is actually a settlement. It's just the banks doing that which will profit maximize for the banks anyway.